Welcome to the ID Den podcast, the show for teachers ready to step outside the classroom and into their next chapter. I'm your host, Charity Bosch, and I know firsthand how overwhelming it can feel to leave teaching behind. Whether you're exploring instructional design, navigating corporate culture, or just figuring out your first steps, this show is your roadmap. Each episode will tackle the real challenges, share practical strategies, and prove that your teaching skills are exactly what the world needs, just in a different setting. Let's turn that classroom expertise into your career advantage. Today, I want to talk about a common pain point that I see teachers run into, and I'm calling that freelancing fear. I see a lot of teachers worried about the job market and wondering if it's even worth trying to transition out of the classroom because things seem so wild right now, which is true. And so a lot of them start thinking about, well, maybe I should freelance, but there's a lot of fear that goes into freelancing as well. And we're going to dive all into that fear, dissect it today in this episode. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is the job market is wild right now. That doesn't mean it's going to stay like that. However, based on a lot of trusted resources that I have and things that I'm seeing, articles by trusted organizations, people that I know and trust, the job market is going to be transitioning into a primarily freelance-based market. Right now, it is hard for companies to hire certain roles, especially the creative roles. Think graphic designers, instructional designers, things like that. And it's easier for them to outsource it, not have to pay for benefits, not have to pay a salary, because honestly, right now, with the way the market is, there's a lot of uncertainty with the way that things are going in the United States. There is a lot of added cost to companies. And one way for companies to pass that on, and one way for companies to deal with that is if it's a product-based company, they up their prices so that they are not eating the cost, you are. Another way that companies are dealing with this is by reducing their workforce, lowering their overhead, and outsourcing projects to freelancers. So let's start by talking about why freelancing beats full-time employment. First, you have complete control over your schedule and your workload. You get to choose what projects you pick up, how many you're working on, what hours you work. You have complete control. I will say, when you are freelancing, if you come across a job that wants you to work specific hours in a specific time zone, if they even want you to come into their office, that is not a freelancing job. They are trying to get a full-time employee without the benefits run for the hills. However, if it's a true freelance job, they don't get to dictate your schedule. They don't get to dictate the days you work. They don't get to dictate how many hours you work in a day. They don't get to dictate anything. It is the project that you are agreeing to, that you are committing to by a certain deadline, and you get to choose when, how, and where you work on that. There is a higher earning potential with freelance work than traditional employment. However, a lot of that is going to base on how much you're charging and how much you're working. If you're not charging very much and you're not working very much, traditional employment might be more lucrative. So you have to keep in mind making sure that you're charging the appropriate rates and working enough to make more than you would in a traditional employment. You get to choose the projects that you're working on and those that align with your interests. You get to choose the companies that you work with and the ones that you're passionate about and skip on the ones that you are not even interested in. And like I mentioned earlier, you have geographic freedom. You can work from anywhere. If you've been wanting to move and you've been tied down to your teaching job in the location you're at, doing freelance instructional design gives you the ability to live wherever you want to live. It also allows you to build a more diverse portfolio because you can work across multiple industries. Whereas if you get a full-time job in one industry, You're going to build your expertise and your portfolio based on that one industry. So, especially when you're starting out, freelance gigs are really helpful because it allows you to experiment with different industries to figure out what you really want to do. And if you really, really want to have a full time job, doing some of these freelance gigs on the side helps you figure out what industries you might want to apply for full time jobs within. You also don't have to deal with office politics or difficult coworkers. If you build your freelancing business to the point, like I have, where you need contractors sometimes to complete projects, you get to choose those people. So you don't have to work with people you don't want to work with. So let's start diving into the fears now that we know some of the benefits. The first fear that I want to talk about is probably the most common and probably what comes to mind a lot right off the bat is how to even get started and how to operate your business. A lot of people end up getting paralyzed by not knowing where to begin. You get overwhelmed by business setup requirements, what you should even have in order to operate a business. It can be confusing about what tools are actually necessary, what tools are nice to have. And I know there can be a lot of worry about the tax and legal implications of freelancing or starting your own business. Let's dive in. The essential tools that you actually need to do freelance is first and foremost a computer and a reliable internet connection. If you already have a computer, which most of you probably do, if not all of you, and a reliable internet connection, which most of you probably already do, then you're already starting off on a really great foot. From there, you're going to want to have some sort of basic project management tool. Now, I personally use Monday.com. It is pricey, but I use it for my business and I use it for some personal aspects. My husband also helps me. I hire him to do some things for my business. So he's in the system. I use it with clients to give them insight, or if I need them to do part of the project and I can't do my part until they're done, I can give them access to a board. I use them with my subcontractors. So you don't need Monday.com right off the bat. Google Sheets or Excel. Those are very simple tools that you can use for project management. I don't want you to think that you need Asana or Trello or Monday. Right off the bat, you don't. However, you might get to a place in your business where you have the ability to pay for those higher end. And my personal favorite after working in Asana, Trello, ClickUp, Monday is Monday. I'm a huge proponent of Monday.com. Love them. And then you need some sort of a communication platform. A lot of times for you starting out, that's email and Zoom or Google Meet, some way to communicate with potential clients, have meetings, gain those clients, and then continue to communicate with those clients throughout the project. I also have Slack, which I use with my subcontractors. I do not use any sort of Slack conversations with clients. That is a boundary that I maintain. I communicate with clients via email or web meetings. However, with my subcontractors, I communicate via Slack. You're also going to want some sort of time tracking software. Again, you could keep it as simple and manual as a Google Sheet or an Excel sheet, or you can do something like Toggle. That's what I personally use for my time tracking, especially once you get multiple clients, you're trying to track across multiple people. It's really helpful to have something like that, but that doesn't mean it can't be done within some sort of spreadsheet software. You can, just might be a little bit more cumbersome. You also are going to need, and this is a non-negotiable, some sort of simple invoicing system. Now, I use QuickBooks. You don't need to jump to QuickBooks right away. There's a lot of great freelancing platforms. When I first started out, I was using Bonsai. I know a lot of people use FreshBooks or HoneyBooks, but you are going to want some sort of invoicing system to be able to send those invoices and receive payments from your clients. Another thing that you're definitely going to need is some sort of cloud storage for files and file sharing specifically. So Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, some sort of place where you organize it very well. I organize mine by client. And then within clients, I have subfolders where if I need to share a PowerPoint slide deck that's too big to send via email, I can drop it in this folder that they have access to, that they know to go to when I need them to review something. Some nice to have tools that can help you scale and grow are a professional website or portfolio platform. Now, portfolios are going to be important regardless. You're going to need to somehow be able to show your portfolio items, but right away, you could just be doing that through some sort of file sharing system. As you grow, you might want to look into, and I do have for both of my businesses actually, a professional website. And I do have for my other business that is client work, a professional website that has a portfolio section so that when I have leads, I can send them the link to that section and say, here, you can take a look at some of my work. You also might want to have social media scheduling tools like Hopper. I use Hopper to schedule some of my social media items. I don't use it for everything, especially when it comes to LinkedIn, and we'll get into that later. You want to manually post those. So I do use Hopper for some things. I did get a lifetime license with them, so it's not a recurring item for me. So I use it where it makes sense and where it's convenient, but I do keep some things to manual posting. You want, as you scale and grow, to elevate your freelancing invoicing system to something that's a little bit more robust. Like I said, I started out with Bonsai and I've upgraded now to QuickBooks. I do still use Bonsai for some aspects, like sending contracts for signatures. However, all of my accounting stuff, I do that all through QuickBooks. And you also are going to want to invest in some more advanced design tools as you scale, like Canva Pro. I use Canva for a lot of things that I do for client work or for marketing. And so as you scale and grow, that's something that you might want to invest in. Another thing would be a CRM system, client relationship management system. That's what CRM stands for. And that's just a way to keep track of your current clients, clients that maybe are potential clients that you've reached out to, cold outreach. We're going to get into all of that later in this episode. Some sort of way to keep track of who you want to contact, who you've contacted, who you have projects going for, maybe who's declined you that you want to follow up on with like the next 6 months to a year, things like that. As you start getting more and more business and start doing those things, it's really helpful to have that. I will say, this is part of why I love Monday. They have a CRM built in, or you could just use a normal Monday board for that. You can also just use a spreadsheet, but keep in mind, as you're starting to reach out and grow your business to hundreds of different clients, thousands of different clients, a spreadsheet's going to become very cumbersome. So having some sort of software dedicated to this does become very helpful. And let's talk about LLC and legal structure. LLCs are set up to protect your personal assets from your business liability. You don't have to have an LLC to freelance. In fact, the subcontractors that I use currently, none of them have LLCs. However, I, right off the bat, with both of my businesses, set up LLCs. Actually, I have one LLC and then one DBA, which we don't need to fully go into here. But a limited liability company, that's what LLC stands for, is going to be something that is a good thing to do. It's really simple to set up. You can do it online. LegalZoom, I think, offers that. I'm pretty sure I did mine through them. It usually takes about maybe 30 minutes. The cost does vary by state. I think I paid $100 for mine. And you can also consider business insurance if you want additional protection. But LLCs are helpful to keep your business and your personal separated. So if you're going to do an LLC, you want to make sure that you have a business checking account. So the one thing with Bonsai is you can add that on. I have mine through QuickBooks now. You want to make sure that you are doing the best that you can to keep your business and your personal finances separate with an LLC. If you don't have an LLC and you're just operating as yourself under a 1099, then it's not that big of a deal. Your payments can go into your personal account. However, if you have an LLC, make sure that you separate those things. It's also really helpful if you consult with an accountant for tax implications and any of the little nuances, especially when it comes to the state by state differences. that an accountant is going to know very well. We've been using an accountant to do our taxes for years. So when I started my business, part of what our package is with her is ongoing business support throughout the year, aside from just tax time. And so that's something that you might want to consider as well. Let's dive into the next part of this sphere, and that comes down to setting your rates. So a lot of times you're like, okay, cool. Now I know what I need in order to start freelancing to set up my business, but what the heck do I charge? And this is where imposter syndrome around charging those professional rates is something that I commonly see with teachers. Because let me get my soapbox out here for a second. Teachers are grossly underpaid. The value that you deliver compared to the amount that you are compensated for that value is laughable. So a lot of time teachers come in thinking there's no way I could charge $100 an hour. I don't have that sort of value to bring because unfortunately it has been ingrained in you that your value is less than. I want to get that out of your head right now. Your value is immeasurable. What you bring to the table is huge with your former experience as a teacher or current experience if you're just looking to do some side gigs. And I don't want you to ever think, I can't charge that because I'm just a teacher, because that is a load of bullcrap. And I don't ever want you to think that you aren't worth those professional rates. A lot of times I see fear of pricing yourself out of opportunities. Oh, if I charge that, they're going to say no and go with someone else. When in reality, if you're going to charge and try and be the cheapest, you're going to have a harder time getting work because people are going to come to you and say, ugh, why are they only charging that much? They must not be very good. So think about that. Keep those things in mind that A, you are worth it. You have that value. And B, you are good at it. And you don't want to communicate through cheap pricing that you might not be good at what you do. A lot of times there's also confusion about hourly versus project-based pricing, and then also not knowing what competitors charge. So where do you even start? So let's dive into that first. If you want to know where to start with your prices, you're going to need to do some research for your competition. You can do this by checking job boards for similar roles and requirements and see what people are charging for that. You could look at freelancer profiles on Upwork, and we'll get a little bit more into Upwork later in this episode. You could join industry Facebook groups and observe the rate discussions that happen there, and use salary websites as your baseline. Just keep in mind, salary websites are usually focused on traditional full-time roles. So you're going to want to add that freelance premium. And then also consider your unique experience and the specializations that you might have. And we'll get into this in a little bit because your value comes into play with your pricing. It's not just, oh, an e-learning is this across the board and everybody charges the same. You bring value to the table that you want to include within your pricing structure. Another good idea is to use Jamie Brendel's income formula. And how you do that is you calculate your desired annual salary, how much you want to make in your pocket. Then add 30 to 50% for taxes, benefits, vacation time, sick days, things like that. I personally add 35%. With being in Idaho with my state taxes, conversations with my accountant, that's what I was guided to do. So I take whatever, add 35%. That'll cover my taxes. That'll allocate for some sick days when I'm unable to work, which we'll get into pricing by project, not hourly, so that that's not as big of a deal. But regardless, you want to add that on to your desired annual salary in your pocket to make sure that you cover those bases. that might change based on where you're located. So, this is again where even if it's just a one time conversation off the bat and not something like ongoing support like I have with my CPA, talk to an accountant who can help you figure out what is realistic for you in your state, in your location to cover your bases for at least taxes, and then add 5 to 10% on for benefits, vacation time. Keep in mind, one thing that was very hard for me when I started, I left my job. My husband was already freelancing. Crap, we don't have health insurance now, and we had to pay out of pocket. And I didn't think about that. So make sure that if you are in a situation where if you were to leave the classroom, your family no longer has health insurance provided from an employer, do some research on healthcare costs to figure out what you would need to cover. For us personally, here in good old Idaho, a family of five for, I would say, average insurance. It wasn't the bottom of the barrel, but it also wasn't like the best insurance in the world. We were paying $1,500 a month for health insurance. My husband ended up getting a full time job again through a marketing agency that he was really excited about. And we have health insurance through him now. But if he ever decides that he wants to leave and go do his own thing, that is something that we are going to need to take into account. So think about that. I feel like that's often overlooked, and it's really important to pay attention to. Once you have your annual salary with your added tax benefits, sick vacation time coverage, you can then take that and divide it by a variety of things. You can divide it by projects so that you know how many projects in a year you need to work. You could divide it by hours of how many hours you want to work in a year, and then that will give you your minimum hourly rate to meet that goal of yours. But you want to make sure that you are taking a look at either you could divide it by 12 months, how much you need to make in a month. Maybe you want to take basically all of December, Christmas time off. Maybe you want to take off a couple months in the summer. So then you're dividing it by 9 months instead so that you know how much you need to make each of those months. So that's where you decide what you want to divide it by. But either way, you divide it by whatever it is you're going for. We'll just go with hourly as the example. Then you have your minimum hourly rate in order to meet that goal. Some of you might look at that and think, oh, that was a lofty goal. Maybe I should bring down my desired annual salary. Some of you might look at that and say, wow, that's less than I was teaching. Maybe I need to up my goals. You can take a look based on the results and figure it out. But at the end of the day, as a freelancer, you're in charge of this, and it's really empowering that if I want to make $150,000 in my pocket a year, this is how much I need to be charging. And you know what? I'm worth $150,000 a year. I am worth this rate. And then also, it's good to add some profit margin on top of that for growth and reinvestment. For me personally, my business started out as freelancing. I'm growing it into a full fledged business. I eventually want to hire full time W-2 employees. So I have to add profit margins to allow me to do that growth and reinvest into my business with better tools, with hiring subcontractors, eventually being able to pay benefits. And so if that's your goal, make sure that you're looking into that, keeping in mind those nice to have tools. If you want to get to a place where you're paying for Canva Pro, you need to add some profit margin on top to make sure that you're able to reinvest into your business and do that growth. Now let's talk about project-based versus hourly pricing. Hourly is good for ongoing work that has an undefined scope. If you have a client comes to you and says, I need consulting work. I don't exactly know what I need from you. I just need help. I need help figuring out what I need from you, all of those sorts of things. New clients like this as well. That's a good place to go to your hourly pricing. If it's an undefined scope, you don't know what you're giving them in the end, charge hourly until you figure that out. I don't advise staying hourly forever. It's going to limit your growth, it's going to limit your potential, and it's really tough and opens up payment issues where you're invoicing for hours worked. So you're not invoicing until you have done the hours. And then you have to wait whatever the terms that you agreed upon with your client for them to pay by. And then you risk late payments. And now you can't pay your bills. You can't pay for the new software you wanted to get that month. It creates a whole lot of problems. I don't advise sticking with hourly. I only charge hourly for consultant work. And if a client comes to me and says, I know we need some courses, I don't know what that looks like, great. I'm going to charge you hourly as a consultant until we figure that out. Once we figure that out, then I move to project based, which is better for more experienced freelancers, and especially if you have defined deliverables. You know what's within the scope of the project. You know at the end, this is what I'm handing over. Now, one thing I want to recommend is within project based pricing, you want to consider value based project based pricing. So, you want to charge for a project, and this is everything included within that project. But you have value to deliver. So make sure that you are including that value within the project. At the end of the day, it's not about an e-learning course. It's not about an instructor-led course. It's about the business benefits they will reap because of those courses. That is value you are adding to their business that you need to charge for. Outcome-based pricing is another way that it's called. Your outcome for them is not just an e-learning course. So make sure that you're charging for the outcome they're getting, not the deliverable that you are handing off to them in the end. There's also a retainer model where you can charge a set monthly fee for ongoing availability, whether they use it or not. That's up to them. I personally don't like retainers. I don't want to have to be beholden to someone. I like to work within projects. I know when it starts, I know when it ends. I can move on to another client or another project for that client. I don't typically like retainer models, but if it's for something like LMS administration, where I'm going to do a project for the LMS implementation and then say, okay, you can have a retainer model 20 hours a month at this cost. Whether you use the 20 hours or not, that's entirely up to you and your needs. Some months you're going to hit that 20, some months maybe it's only 10, some months maybe it's only 5, but for the ongoing support, here's the monthly cost to you. And whether you take advantage of it or not is up to you. That is a situation in which I will consider a retainer model. But more often than not, I don't want to just say, oh, you have me for 20 hours a month for whatever you want, when maybe what I'm charging for that retainer is not going to reflect what they're using me for. So if you're going to use a retainer model, you want to make sure that you are being very clear about what's included within that retainer, and don't let it start going into project-based types things. Make it very, this is what I'm doing. This is what's included in the retainer. Anything else, I would need to scope out a project-based fee for. Obviously, you're going to mix approaches based on the client and the project scope. Again, I've had clients where I start out at hourly for consultant work until we figure out what they need, and then I switch to value-based, project-based pricing. If it's LMS implementation, I charge for that as a project, as a package. If they want ongoing LMS administration or support after, maybe I use a retainer model. So you're going to mix and match based on your clients and what they need. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with your teacher friends who are considering freelancing or instructional design full time. But this episode in particular will be beneficial for those considering freelancing or trying to do side gigs. Please connect with me on Instagram at @theIDDen. Freelancing fears are totally normal. Don't let them paralyze you. Again, the future of the workforce in America is going to be freelance, especially for creative design fields like instructional design. Every successful freelancer started exactly where you are now, including me. Just take action on one small step at a time rather than waiting for the perfect condition, the perfect client, the perfect post. Something is better than nothing. Done is better than perfect. Stay tuned for Freelancing Fears Part 2.